Warning, you are about to hear a discussion that you may feel a little bit uncomfortable, but that's good because there is a child sexual exploitation escalating and exploding across the United States and also across the globe. And today, Lori Cohen joins us and she says, enough. Let's hear about Lori. She joined Protect All Children from Trafficking, PACT, everybody, PACT, in November 2019 after founding and leading a legal services program that assisted survivors of international and domestic. I'm sorry, and domestic. Lori. You do so much. Your bio is so extensive. I'm confused here. Um, we're laughing, Lori, of international and domestic sex trafficking and related forms of gender-based violence. While Lori is a lawyer and initially focused on legal remedies, she realized the need for holistic care, including safe housing. We're going to get into that, medical and psychological support, and economic empowerment. Lori and her clients developed educational training for law enforcement, judges, social workers, and healthcare providers to help identify, so necessary, human trafficking, and also advocated for legislative change with policymakers. Lori's doing a lot of that today. We're going to talk a lot about that too. Lori leveraged her skills and experiences to elevate survivor voices and generate a greater impact on a larger scale. Lori is a warrior, everybody. The website is wearepact.org. Again, that's PACT. Everything, rest assured, Lori, everything about you and PACT is going to be in the body of this video so our warriors can follow along, take their time, read about all of the great work. So Lori Cohen, welcome to the Warriors.
Thank you so much, Lynn. And just such gratitude to you and the Warriors for raising awareness about this very difficult but absolutely essential discussion.
Well, thank you, because I am very honored that we're collaborating now, we're talking, we're forming a friendship, because I truly believe that community creates change. That's our hashtag, that true collaboration, just not talking about it, really will make a difference, will make a dent, will begin and snowball across all of this. I'm holding to that, Lori, because I think it's happening and it's happening with us already. So I know that we're doing the right thing. I want to jump right in, but before we do, Lori, let's have a little information about Lori. Anything you want to talk about, where you grew up, where you went to school, anything you want to share with us that we may not know. So spill the tea, as they like to say on other programs.
I am a New Yorker, born and bred. I briefly lived in Los Angeles for a year in the middle of high school, which was a very difficult time. So between 9th grade and 12th grade, I went to 4 different schools, which I think gives me a sense of empathy for people who are feeling uprooted, and especially young people where you're trying to form your identity and you have to keep moving around. But now I'm back in New York, but in between, I lived in the Midwest for about a decade in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I worked in Detroit and worked for the Archdiocese of Detroit, leading what was then a really quite amazing program for immigrants and refugees that was sponsored by the Cardinal, and really got very committed to working with immigrant communities that were seeking asylum and refugee status and safety in the United States, and people who just appreciated what a great country this is, and that this was a place where they could feel safe, and a place that they wanted to call home, and raise their families in safety and live the American dream. So that was quite an amazing experience. And then when I returned to New York, I was recruited to work at Sanctuary for Families in New York City to work with, at that point, immigrant women who were victims of gender-based violence. At that time, there were some new laws in place to protect what then was seen as just women, and now it's been expanded to women and men, and to try to help them get legal status, because many of them were in abusive relationships and couldn't leave because they were afraid they would be deported and arrested if they tried to leave the abuse. And so Congress actually passed in 2000 some sweeping laws to protect victims of gender-based violence. So there were all these new immigration remedies that I hadn't known about. I hadn't been familiar with them. I had been working with them with asylum seekers, and this was like an almost like another version of asylum, but it was asylum for activities that were happening here in the United States, and another aspect of how our lawmakers were seeking to make sure that vulnerable people were being protected. So I was working with women who were considered domestic violence victims, and then it was very strange because these women would come into my office and talk about what happened to them, and and I'm glad you gave trigger warnings because this is actually a somewhat difficult conversation. They would tell me about all sorts of horrible things that their partners did to them, but then they would mention that their partner, it could be their boyfriend, but in some cases it was their husband, was selling them to other men for sex. And I didn't understand this at first. You know, I was supposed to be serving domestic violence victims, and I thought I knew what domestic violence was. I worked in a domestic violence clinic when I was in law school, and so I sort of was used to, not used to, but understood what the dynamics were. And this was something new. And then I started seeing it again and again and again, and I realized that this was trafficking, and I hadn't known what trafficking was. We hadn't covered this topic in law school. It wasn't something that I had ever really known about. And it was in my face. These were my clients. They were victims of trafficking, but no one knew. No one knew. That the police who had arrested their batterer didn't know. The healthcare system that treated them for their injuries didn't know. And when they were in front of a judge seeking some kind of protective order, some kind of relief that would keep them safe from their abuser, the judges didn't know. And I realized, like, I was feeling terrible as their lawyer, but I realized there was a whole lack of awareness within our entire legal system and our healthcare system. Doctors and nurses and social workers were seeing hundreds and thousands of trafficking victims. And I know there was some study that maybe 80% of trafficking victims are in touch with a healthcare provider at some point. They weren't being identified. And so I made it my mission not to only serve the client in front of me, but to really get to work on raising awareness and understanding that this is rampant. It is not what it looks like in the movies. It is just everywhere. It's right in front of us. And we may have one now, when we hear about trafficking, we may have an idea of what does a trafficking victim look like. I would say those preconceptions are gone. Anyone can be trafficked.
Yeah. Oh, Laura, you opened up a whole can of worms with everything.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to start with you. But I'm now, may I ask, you don't have to answer this. Why did you go to 4 different high schools? You don't have to answer it if you don't want to. Was your like mother in the military, father in the military or something?
My dad got a job.
That's tough on a high schooler.
He was getting he got a new job. We had gone, so 9th grade and 10th grade were 2 different schools in those days. So I was in one school for 9th grade, then I started 10th grade, and then right before Thanksgiving, my dad got this new job and we moved. So I remember spending Thanksgiving, like, we were sleeping on the floor. We were staying in a motel. It wasn't the most fun Thanksgiving. But I had of course I had a boyfriend, and I was in love, and I left my boyfriend. So
Oh,
it was
no, that's the worst thing.
no,
Forget sitting on the floor. That's okay. It's the
I
boyfriend.
know, it was my first boyfriend. So it was very sad. So then and then the job, so I was at a new high school in Southern California. Actually, it was a great school. It was really fun. As a New Yorker, I'd never met like people from LA culture, and people were skateboarding and surfing and
like
all this
relaxing.
stuff. But it was really, I mean, it was fun actually, and but they made fun of my accent. Like in class, they would sometimes make me speak just so they could laugh and make me say what a, you know.
Bullies, bullies,
It
LA
was, I
bullies.
mean, it was, I think they were jealous. I think they all wanted a New York accent. That's my way of thinking
Good.
about
I
it.
like you looking at it like that.
And
Yeah.
then the job, that dream job just didn't work out. And so we ended up coming back to New York to another community and going to another school. So it was a lot. And that was in the middle of my junior year of high school. And so it was pretty disruptive. And but it just made me feel like, okay, I can adapt and I need to adapt and be flexible. And uh, I think in the long run, it's helped me be adaptable. But at the time, as a teenager, and when you're just trying to figure out your identity and who you are and who your friends are and what your friend group is, I just kept moving around. So perhaps it forced me to be more of an extrovert, that I just couldn't sit back and let things happen. That if I wanted to meet people, if I wanted to do things, I really needed to put myself in the situation.
Yeah, you had a good mindset, Lori, because I'm glad you didn't have the internet back then. Because no, this is just an example, sort of a little bit of an analogy that, that kind of disruption and, leaving a boyfriend and just moving from, house to house, home to home.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of kids would go on an internet, right? And they would seek
Mhm.
companionship or they want to vent or whatever they're doing. And that's where the predation starts. But we'll leave that for a minute. So all of this that you're explaining, I wanted to ask you, why lawyer? It seems like you sort of were geared to go in that direction of helping, right? But why didn't you go, I don't know, the Peace Corps or something? What made you wanted to fight for justice? You want to see justice for people?
I really was very committed to justice, and I saw law as a tremendous tool that could be used to protect people, that could be used to make change. And I felt like the legal system was great. Like, I mean, clearly now, as an adult and who's someone who's been a practicing lawyer for quite some time, I'm aware of a lot of the flaws of the legal system. But when I was little, I just thought, oh yeah, there are these laws that can protect you and can make people safe and prevent the bad guys from doing things. And I just had this vision of, we're going to use the law to try to help keep people safe. And
Yeah.
there's still a part of me that believes that. Like, I think the legal system can exist to really help individuals, and that's what I like to focus on.
Yeah, I like it that you know what, Lori, like I'm right there with you. I still think it can be that tool to help us, appropriately used and spoken about and implement it. Again, I'm not a lawyer like you, but I do want you to know, Lori, that right now I'm binging on LA Law late at night. That is what I'm, I don't know
That's
when
nice.
that was on, the 80s or something, but I missed it then, but I'm binging on it now. I'm catching up now. But, they actually portray it like kind of glamorous, sort of, in these law series on television, or I guess it's still called television. Streaming is the word they use now. I want to get into PACT a little bit.
Sure.
Let's talk about the mission. The mission is we protect every child's right to grow up free from child sexual exploitation and trafficking through education, legislative advocacy, and partnerships. And I just want to say to our warriors out there, I feel like wherever I go now, anything to do with any of this, I see Lori there. I feel like I'm starting to see you all over the place. But tell us about this mission statement.
PACT was created about 35 years ago. We initially were created to look at the issue of what was called child sex tourism. Now it's called extraterritorial child sexual abuse, because child sex tourism sounds kind of friendly and makes it sound harmless. But there was a concern about children being sold in countries that were, developing countries, very low income, to tourists who were coming from sort of industrial developed countries, and men with disposable income who were coming and purchasing children for sex. And I had a chance to look back at some of the early archives of our organization, and there were articles written about the justification for this, that
Yes.
somehow this was some form of foreign aid, that we had men going overseas and giving parents money so they could have sex with their 6-year-old child. And then also articles justifying that, countries that were not industrial, European and American countries, the people from other countries were much more relaxed and less prudish about relationships between adults and children, and that this was a problem with our Puritan values. I mean, it's really horrible and quite racist, actually. Uh, some of the literature that I had looked at from the early days. And so PACT was part of a global coalition to address the exploitation of children in initially in Thailand and then in other parts of Asia. And so we were known as End Child Prostitution and Asian Tourism. And PACT was part of a group that advocated very successfully to criminalize this kind of behavior. So in the United States now, it is a crime for a US citizen or a green card holder to make plans to travel overseas to purchase a child for sex. It's a felony. It was a really important piece of legislation. And most recently, a case that I was aware of was there's a legislator in South Dakota. One of the senior legislator in South Dakota was just convicted for traveling to Czechia and paying to have sex with boys in Prague. And his defense at the time had been, well, the age of consent in Prague is lower than in the United States, but that is separate from purchasing children. So it's, it is a law that we see is there, it's active, and hopefully it is sending a message that we can't travel overseas to essentially rape children, because children can't consent, and if they're not consenting, it's rape. So those were our early days. What happened over time is we realized that this is not just a problem in Asia, it's a problem here in our own backyard. And so we continue to work with the global network, which is active in over 100 countries, but we've really focused our lens on what's happening here in the United States. And in some way, it's easier to say it's an overseas problem, and I don't want to minimize that, but it's a problem here.
It's a huge problem here. It is. I feel like, Lori, I am, yes, we work in this arena. I don't even know if that's the right way to say it, or I feel like I'm surrounded by it every day, between press releases, between stories I see online, between, I just had somebody contact me. She was friendly with somebody, and she said, I can't believe it. He was a family friend, and that's here in New York. And, he was picked up and this and that. You would never know, the greatest guy and a father. And that is what we have to raise awareness about. It can look like anybody, it can be anybody, right? And
Absolutely.
it's not just, that shady kind of looking person. My concern is it's becoming, Lori, so like normalized, right? And people become habituated almost to, so they just disregard it. It's a tough enough subject anyway to get people on board with, the raising awareness and implementing some guardrails. But I feel like they'll be like, oh, just another case, just another, as opposed to we have to talk about it as a community, as parents, as grandparents. We have to really get it into the schools. We have to have education now. It's just a different kind of world.
Yeah.
That's where I come from. Like, we have to not be embarrassed. We have to be able to open it up and exchange ideas. I go back to that word collaborate. I truly mean that. Because Lori, and I know there's so many groups and organizations, but I feel like for the most part, everybody's going their own way. Everybody's fighting for their own dollar. Everybody's just overwhelmed. But in the meantime, the predators just keep winning, because they just sweep right in there. They know all this. They love it, all the dissension or disorganization, and they're making the gains, and perhaps we're not, right? But not with you on board, Lori. We're making a lot of gains. I want to, what else I get asked a lot about is, and I saw it on your website as well, that what is that relationship? And you can pick, the child and a trafficker, right? People really don't understand that dynamic. I know it's kind of like an open-ended question. I get
Mm-hmm.
a lot of, why doesn't that child scream and run away? You
Yeah.
know, why doesn't that child tell somebody? Well, we have adults that don't run away or tell somebody. So imagine a child. What do you want? How would you address that?
It's such a great question. There is a common misconception about stranger danger. And we all talked about stranger danger. We all had kids and said, don't talk to strangers. And the sad piece about trafficking is that the traffickers are often known to the child and they're known to the family. They're seen as a trusted adult, and that's the way they're able to get control over the child, because this is someone who's known and trusted and has access to the child. So I remember during the pandemic when we were all going online really intensively, maybe for the first time for some of us. And there were lots of stories about kidnappings happening, like random strangers coming and kidnapping kids out of shopping carts. And saying, watch out for traffickers. And the truth is kidnapping is absolutely a crime, but that's different from trafficking. And trafficking is when someone is taking a child and violating their trust and violating their body. And it was one of the most difficult things for me to deal with as an attorney. And it's actually one of the reasons why I did realize we needed to have more holistic care, because as a lawyer, I was thinking about what's the legal remedy? How do we fix this to kind of move this person into a safer place, which is totally was what I was supposed to do as a lawyer. And it sort of was living my idealistic views about the law can help this. But I also understood the law was not enough, that the law couldn't make the person whole. And one reason it couldn't make the person whole is because they were shattered, because they were raped and abused, and I mean, just horrible things that happened to them, strangled, had their jaw broken, given multiple concussions, burned, slashed, shot at. So, I mean, any kind of horrific abuse you could think about. But the other thing that happened was that this was often somebody who they thought they loved, someone who they thought they trusted, someone who they believed was going to take care of them, and maybe was the only person who would take care of them. And healing those kinds of wounds was so challenging, because the physical injuries are terrible, but you can watch the wounds heal. The psychological damage can go on for decades and decades, and sometimes somebody can't heal, and that's quite tragic.
Mm. You know, I want to go on now to it says your vision. Tell us about the vision at PACT. You know, to build a world in which no child is bought, sold, or used for sex. I mean, you've explained a lot of things, but I think, Laura, we have to talk about these things almost like brainwash society. Seriously, I really do feel like people are just so used to hearing these stories in 2025, and because they're dark and ugly, right? They'll close their eyes, they'll close the door. We have to get in their faces. So tell us the vision. What do you
Yeah.
think in 2025? How has it changed the vision from, I don't know, even 5 years ago?
I, so when you say it's so basic, every child has a fundamental human right to grow up free from being sexually exploited. Like, that's it. We want to make sure every child is safe, every child's body is safe, that their spirit is safe, that they have a sense of self, and that they can grow up understanding that their body is theirs. No one has the right to violate them. And it just feels so fundamental. And the idea
Yeah.
that we're not there, so many children globally, and I should add, here in the United States, are being violated every single day. And we need to be clear about this. This is not something good for kids. It's not even good for teenagers. I've had people say to me, well, you know, that child they're not really a child because they're very physically developed. They're still a child. They're still a child. And there's no justification for it. And we need to call it what it is. It's rape.
Okay, because I was going to say to you, it's pretty clear what's going on here, right? Like, here's the reality. Why is this so hard? You pointed out, the vision. Every
Right. Well,
child deserves a safe childhood. Yet it's so hard and seems to be getting harder. Why do you think that is?
so there are two things. One, which PACT has really been leaning into, is social media that is so accessible. You mentioned this earlier when I was a teenager. It's thank goodness I didn't have access to social media as a kid, because in those days when I was feeling really disconnected, I certainly could see myself as somebody who really tried to create community online. And while that could be good for some kids, I could see if I was in a bad place, and there were times that I really was, that somebody could have taken advantage of that. So and every adolescent, even if they're not moving around from place to place, they have bad moments, they have bad times, and some of them have very difficult childhoods where they are. I mean, for me, it was there's a certain amount of privilege in middle class, and that my dad took a job and we moved, but I had a supportive family, and we knew that we would have food, and we knew eventually we would get a home, right? Some of the children we work with don't know that. They don't have that privilege. And those are the kids who really, if they're lonely and they meet someone online and that person validates them and tells them they love them and they understand them, and maybe they're the only person who understands them, that children can grab onto that and really believe it. And we all want to be loved. We all want to be told we're wonderful. We all want to be comforted. And so if it's coming from somebody who initially is a stranger but no longer is a stranger, now they're a trusted friend, and even a romantic partner, even if they haven't met in person, if you fall hard, those teenagers fall hard. When teenagers fall, they fall in love really hard, and that's really powerful. So I think that's a concern, that there's the media. I mean, social media right now, and the online environment that our kids are in is not a safe space for them, and our Congress needs to do a stronger job of regulating the internet so that children are protected. There have been steps made. I think there's some exciting developments now that hopefully we're seeing some move in the right direction, but we need to do a lot more because our kids are constantly at risk. So that's one. And I want to say there's another piece of this, which is that people there are people in positions of authority and power that like this the way it is because they get to have access to kids and there's no accountability. And so, one thing that PACT has been very involved in is addressing issues around demand. And that if we're looking at the criminal justice system and seeing that children are being arrested for prostitution, if children are being arrested for being forced to participate in criminal acts by their exploiters, but the men, and I know people can say women can purchase children for sex too, and I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I have not yet seen it. But the men who purchase kids feel that they can get away with it, and they generally do. And so we are here to say enough. There needs to be accountability, and we can't say that men who have access to wealth and the ability to pay for kids should be allowed to be let off the hook, that they need to be held responsible for this crime.
It's, look, it's my, money talks and crime walks. It's like,
That's it.
but that's like the bottom line, right?
Yeah.
And we do have to address this end demand, and it is happening. So when I say there's hope within all of this, like, that is something we are now talking a lot about. But as you pointed out, if there's no accountability, it'll just keep escalating, or people who wouldn't even try this will say, oh, nothing will happen to me, let me try it, kind of thing. But to think that, our precious children, right? I always say, like, our children. Like everybody's, in this
Yeah,
together, all of our
our
children.
children, absolutely.
No, but it's hard, Lori, to think about that people do this to kids, kind of thing. I don't let my one side of the brain go there because then I can't really function if I go. I have to stay on the warrior side to think about it. But
Yeah,
there's such a yeah, with the justice system, with the ending demand part, not seeing a lot of it. I'm seeing some things, but not enough. And then when I hear, as you pointed out, you know, kids going to jails or being arrested or being, pressured to try to get names out of them, I'm like, what's going on here?
yeah.
Kind of thing. And I digress a little bit, but my mind's going a little wild with you, Lori. Like what, recently in California, uh, Senator Shannon Grove, there was a bill where they wanted to make it a felony for purchasing, and she accepted, they will not include in that bill 16 and 17-year-olds.
I
So
saw
she
that.
just accepted, like, to get something for a felony. What, but they're still minors, technically. So, like, what's going to happen to the 16 and 17-year-olds with all of that? So I don't really even pretend to understand that kind of thinking at all.
This sliding scale of somehow 16 and 17-year-olds have more agency. They have the ability to say no. They're not going to be coerced, and they're not going to be deceived. I mean, I think if we all think back to when we were 16 or 17 and look back and say, really, were we like, we couldn't drive, we couldn't,
We can't vote. We
we
can't go
can't
into a legal
vote.
contract. We
You
can't
go to an
get a credit
R-rated,
card. I don't think you can get a credit
R-rated
card.
movie.
No, so I don't, but they're a minor. Again, I'm not a lawyer, you are, but like, I don't get it. They're minors. Why aren't they
They're
protected?
minors.
Why aren't they protected?
I mean, there are a number of states where the penalty is less when it's an older child. I think for me, the question is maybe less about how severe is the penalty versus is the law being enforced? Because there are lots of states that have really strong laws. I think Texas, it's a felony to purchase a child. And
Yes.
I'm curious to know how many arrests have there been of men patronizing children for sex? Is that law being enforced? What does it look like? And I, I, what I find really interesting, so Sweden was the first country to pioneer a model where people who were selling sexual services, so we're not just talking about children, we're also talking about adults, were no longer arrested, but that the buyers purchasing these women. So let's for now say the sellers were women and the buyers were men. The buyers would be penalized, and there was a significant drop in trafficking when the law was enforced. The penalties in Scandinavia, and this model then spread throughout Scandinavia. Penalties are not very high, actually. They're fairly low. But what happens is there's the shame factor that now someone's been identified. They're that person who purchases kids for sex. So for some reason, it's totally cool to purchase a child for sex and rape them until they're caught. And then all of a sudden, it's not cool, right? And so the name and shame approach actually has been really effective in Scandinavia and in Sweden to actually change notions of what is healthy masculinity. And is it considered, are you really considered a man because you purchase someone else's body, or is it seen as actually that's not acceptable, and it's actually a problem if you do this? And so I I think if we're a culture that said we're not going to purchase children and we're going to put laws in place, then could we make sure those laws are enforced?
Yes.
And that's the issue that I think we're not seeing. And there I have a lot of theories about why those laws are not being enforced, and I want to see enforcement. Whatever the state's jurisdiction is, let's see enforcement, And then let's see what the impact is on the culture, and has there been a shift?
Let me ask you, and again, you don't have to answer. I always preface it with that, Lori. Why do you think they're not enforced? Do you think too many are complicit? Because to me, it's such a big tangled web of everything, and
Yeah,
everybody.
it's people who are in positions of power who are abusing the system, who are purchasing the children. And it's people in positions of power who are connected to law enforcement. I mean, you said, money talks, crime walks, right? So they're able to buy their way out. And there also are instances where um, law enforcement is not arresting men who are patronizing others for sex. So when I was at my previous job representing victims of trafficking, many of whom came to me because they had been arrested for prostitution and then were referred to me for legal services. Many of them told me that if they were in a brothel and the police would do a raid, the police would tell the men, the sex buyers, put your pants on and go home to your wife,
Yeah,
and
I've
then
heard that.
put the women in handcuffs and take them to the precinct.
So wrong.
And then often, I mean, this is really sad, but my clients told me sometimes the police rape them,
Yeah.
right, as part of the process. So there's a sense of the people who are in vulnerable situations, who are being sexually exploited, who are being abused, are seen as something less than. So it's okay to force someone in prostitution to have sex with you when they're getting arrested, because they're prostitute. Why does it matter, right? And it's that um, dehumanization of people in the commercial sex trade that I find really concerning.
So, Lori, I know you have a very exciting event coming up for PACT. Can you please fill us in? Tell us how the public can get involved and what's going on, because I know I'll be there.
I'm so happy you're coming.
Yeah.
On June 10th, PACT will be celebrating our annual Freedom Awards. It's a wonderful celebration of leaders in the movement to end child trafficking and exploitation. And we've done this for many years. It's really a celebratory night. It's one of the things I really appreciate was your discussion of partnerships. And this is an opportunity to celebrate our partners in the field and people who we really look to in this movement to keep kids safe. So this year's honorees are Rebecca Charleston, who
Love
is an
her.
extraordinary survivor who had a very sad criminal justice history, was pardoned actually by the governor of Texas, and has become a champion on criminal justice reform for trafficking survivors. So very excited to be working with her. There is David Peckinpah is the CEO of Maritz Travel, and David has been such a visionary very early on in our organization's history. David realized the travel and tourism industry had a role in disrupting trafficking and keeping kids safe. So he's been a very long time partner of PACT, and we feel that this is an opportunity to celebrate his leadership and other members in the hospitality industry. And he's so modest, because when I spoke with him about it, he said it's not just me, it's Maritz. It's really Maritz. So I'm looking forward to hearing from him. And then a grassroots organization known as Artists, Athletes, and Activists, AAA, and they provide food and emergency services and coordinate care for vulnerable populations. And we've been very fortunate to partner with them as they're feeding hungry people. We're also providing prevention information to the people they're feeding. So it's sort of, filling their bellies, but also giving them knowledge and tools to stay safe. So we're looking forward to this. It's a wonderful night. It's at the Prince George Ballroom, and information about tickets and sponsorship and ads celebrating these honorees can be found on our website that you were kind enough to mention, www.wearepact.org.
Lori, you're doing my job for me, because I'm going to have all your information in the body of the video, including the link to the event. I'm so excited. I'll be joining everybody and celebrating. When I say there's hope with the community, this is a prime example of hope. We are pact.org. Freedom Awards in June. Lori Cohen, what can I say about you? You're a true warrior. You're a visionary. I just want to thank you. You enable me to do my job better. Your dedication and commitment for years now in all of this area. You must promise me you'll come back, because we didn't get to so many questions. You've got a terrific survivors council, which is, the crux of all of this, empowering them, helping them, let them teach us. And also the public. The public knows they're going to know through me, donating, volunteering, so many different things we all can and must do. So, Lori, I'm going to let you go, but you're going to be coming back real soon, because we have too many more things. I've got a million questions for you, but really understand, Lori, that you are a true warrior. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lynn. It's an honor to be speaking with you, and I'm looking forward to coming back very soon.
Thanks, Lori.
Take care.